Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today for this LOREX-sponsored webinar on writing effective abstracts and summaries. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Adrienne Spomberg, ASLO Director of Communications and Science, and I'm co-PI on the LOREX grant, which is the Limnology and Oceanography Research Exchange. Many of you are directly involved with LOREX. I think there's a few people on the line who aren't involved. If you haven't heard of it, it's an NSF-funded initiative to provide training to graduate students in international research collaboration. And any successful research collaboration hopefully results in a publication or 2 or 3. So for one of our webinars, we wanted to focus on the topic of writing. Today's presenter, Dr. Kelsey Poulson-Ellestad, is a Raelyn Cole Editorial Fellow at ASLO. Kelsey and the other Cole Fellows have been doing workshops and written several blog posts that have traveled far on social media on various topics associated with writing. So we thought she would be a great person to lead you all through this webinar. We're really excited to have her speak to you today about writing effective abstracts and summaries. So Kelsey is currently an assistant professor at Roosevelt University, where she teaches biochemistry and marine biology. She did her PhD at Georgia Tech, where she studied phytoplankton competition and chemical ecology, and then did a postdoc at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, using metabolomics tools to investigate chemically mediated interactions among marine microbes. She's in the second year of her 2-year Raelyn Cole Editorial Fellowship, where she's been working with the other fellows to learn more about the editorial process. And I think she left some information in the chat box for you all, but at this point, I'm going to turn everything over to Kelsey. Oh, thank you.
Okay, first, I want to make sure everyone can hear me. So I know everyone is muted, but if I can get a couple thumbs up or indications from some people. Okay, great, perfect. All right, I didn't want to start if people were unable to hear me. That's great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a PowerPoint presentation that I have. And this is based off of a workshop that myself and one other Raelyn Cole fellow ran at a previous ASLO meeting, but it got a lot of really good feedback, and it seemed like a lot of folks were really interested in the topic, so it sounded like a good one to do for today. So I'm going to just share my screen and go through the slides that way. It's a little strange not being able to see you all and talk with you face to face, but I think this will still work well. If you have a question at any point, you can feel free to put it in the chat bar. I'll get a little indicator that there's been a question posted or that someone has typed something. So I'll try to address those as I go, but there'll definitely be a time at the end for questions. So now that you've seen me, let me share my screen here and get this sorted. And okay, so as Adrienne already introduced me, I'm Kelsey Poulson-Ellestad. I'm an assistant professor at Roosevelt University, but I am a RCEF person, so a Raelyn Cole Editorial Fellow. And just to give you, I have to go down this. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what the Editorial Fellowship is, in case this topic that we talk about today is really interesting to you, or you think that this is something you want to do. It's a fellowship that's about professional development for early career researchers in terms of developing their experience in publishing, peer review, and scientific writing. And then one of the key aspects of our fellowship is that we are going to disseminate our experience to other early career researchers. So we do that through blogs and Twitter, and then workshops and webinars such as this. So there have been 3 of us so far. Laura Falkenberg, I want to point her out right away because she helped me develop this workshop earlier, and she was the first Raelyn Cole Fellow, and she's in Hong Kong now. So I think you guys will meet her perhaps at the next ocean sciences meeting. And then myself, and then Scott Hoteling is the next, or the other current RCF fellow. There's a page on it on the ASLO website. The next application round for folks who want to apply for this fellowship should be in the fall. So, wait, can you see my chat screen? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. Okay, so let's just give you a little background of why I'm here and how I got invited to do this. So really this title is talking about writing effective abstracts and summaries. And so I was hoping to use a poll system where you guys would be able to type in your answers to how you would define effective in this context. So in theory, if this is working, although I am a little skeptical, you should be able to text, oh my goodness, text Kelsey P591 to this number here, 37607 if you're in the States, and then a text message, and you should be able to answer this poll question if you have like a one-word definition for what makes something effective. And we'll see if it works, if we get any responses. And if it doesn't work, then I'll have you guys just type it in the chat box, because we can improvise if we have to. This doesn't look good. Let me see, where is my, all right. This is good. Successfully goal achieving. Let's see if anybody else is able to do it. Goal. Desired impact.
Kelsey, can you repeat the number for texting, I believe? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, of course. So if you text Kelsey P591, which is on the top of the screen, to the number 37607, it should allow you to join in, and then you can text your response to my prompt. Okay, ooh, this is interesting. Okay, so we see, so as this word cloud is formed, we get to see what you guys think of as effective. And I'm interested to see what you think about how this relates to writing in particular. So goal is something that's really common, desired, certain, impactful. Okay, so those are the words that keep coming up. I think impactful is a smaller word there, but that is certainly going to be useful. Desired is that big one. I have some unexpected words here, so that is good.
Kelsey, were we supposed to be able to see the word cloud yet?
You can't see the word cloud?
No, we can't see it.
No, I'm so sorry. Okay, so this is where I wasn't sure if how the polling would work for this. So the word cloud has, here are some terms that are showing up. I truthfully, honestly can't figure out how to get the word cloud to show up if I'm sharing the screen and if it's not sharing with you all. So what I see here is words like certain, desired, communication, understanding, visibility, promotes. So that's another one. Certain, and I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm wondering if it is clarity or something related to that. Impact, resonates. So those are the terms that are coming up that you guys have written, which I think is great. Communication successfully. Yeah, so those are the things that are definitely coming up, which I think really relates to what we want to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. I'm very sorry you couldn't see the word cloud. There goes my like big fancy technological achievement. Can you see this slide here that says search engine optimization?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Okay, so one thing that we're looking at is defining effective, and one way is defining effective is, can people see your paper? Is it out there? Is it searchable? Is it findable? And so one thing to think about when we talk about effective in that sense is, how do you make your paper really stand out in something like a search engine? And it sounds kind of tricky, but really the important thing to know here, this graph is showing the relative roads for how people find research papers on the Wiley online library. So Wiley is the publisher for the ASLO journals, which is why I have this piece of data. And so over half of the visits to the Wiley online library come ultimately from a search engine search, as opposed to something like PubMed or Web of Science or a database like that. So researchers are really using search engines to also look for papers. So one way to think about your work being, or your papers being effective, is to have it optimized so that it is easily found online. The other way to think about it is your writing style, and is it effective in terms of getting your points across? And so, and why would we care about the writing style? So there's a recent paper that came out this year that looked at writing style and citations. And there seems to be an improvement in the number of citations for papers that have been written in a more clear narrative style with the reader in mind, with a lot less jargon. And so what they found was that you are likely to be up to 74% more cited if you have this sort of writing style. So that tends to be another way that you want to think about crafting your papers, if you think about effectiveness ultimately leading to getting your points across, getting found, getting read, and then hopefully getting cited. So what do we mean when we say writing with the reader in mind? And that's usually shortened writing, so not as long as you may typically think. First person narrative, which is becoming also very common. We provide a setting and a context for your work, careful use of conjunctions and punctuation, consistent terminologies, avoiding acronyms, and noun chunks, which is often, I think, referred to as jargon. So a more narrative approach. So those are things to keep in mind that are tricks and styles that are useful, that probably lead to improved accessibility for people trying to read and understand your paper. So I'm gonna omit this survey because I don't think it's gonna show up. Although, so we're gonna talk about a few key paper elements, and they're on this survey. So the title, abstract, and keywords, which are probably what people have already been used to writing. And I'm seeing some surveys come in. I'm assuming you guys can't see the screen. Lots of people have done titles, abstracts, keywords. A couple responses for lay summaries, graphical abstracts. Oh, that's cool. No one has done so far a video abstract. So for the responses I've seen, most folks that have been able to respond so far, titles, abstracts, keywords are the things that people have done most of. A few responses of people who have done lay summaries and graphical abstracts. But this is what I expected so far, is that most of you have had to work on a title, abstract, or keyword. I'm going to talk about lay summaries, graphical abstracts, and video abstracts, but I want to first talk about what we can do with titles, abstracts, and keywords, which are something we sort of always have to think about when we write. What can we do with those three components of our papers to really make them pop and make them work for us to get our work out there and discoverable by people. So thanks for responding to that survey. Okay, so critical elements of your paper, which I'm going to talk about next, the title, abstract, and keywords. So the title, what we really want to focus on here, is having a descriptive title with key phrases. Abstracts are going to have your key points in simple terms, and keywords are your relevant words and phrases. And you ideally want to weave your keywords and phrases throughout your paper. So we'll get to that in a minute. Some new elements that you may start coming across as you think about submitting your work are the idea of lay summaries. So, sometimes those are called 5-point summaries, or significant statements. That's what PNAS calls their lay summary. Graphical abstracts are also very common, and video abstracts. So ASLO publications like L&O letters requires a 3-point or very short significance statement that is distinct from the abstract. So it's in addition to a normal abstract. L&O methods and L&O also allow you to produce video abstracts that they post online. So these might be new to you, and based on the survey results, the quick survey results that I saw, fewer folks here so far seem to have less experience with these elements. So I'll talk about that as we move along. Okay, so how do you use your titles to improve the visibility, accessibility, and garner interest into your paper? So there are some sort of rules of thumb that tend to pop out over time. And so shorter titles seem to be more impactful. Using keywords and phrases in your title as well. So even though you may want to, even though you're going to have a separate keyword section, using keywords in the title is really helpful for search engines to pick up on your paper when someone types in a searchable keyword. And it's good for indexing services. Placing your main concepts at the beginning also helps to make a more impactful title, avoiding abbreviations and acronyms, and also avoiding phrases like effect of, or evidence of, or involvement of. And I am for sure guilty of all of this stuff, of not doing all of this stuff. And I do think I have like an evidence of paper that doesn't actually say anything about what I found in my paper. So it's a really poor title. So these are things that you want to think about when crafting a title early on. It will help. Let's see. Abstracts are really not just shortened versions of your paper. So we want to focus on putting your key points in simple language and using about 3 to 4 of your keywords or phrases in the abstract as well. So the more that those keywords show up in the keyword field, the title and the abstract, the easier it is for search engines to pick up your paper if someone is searching for those keywords. Another point is to place the essential concepts at the beginning. So one way to think of that is, what are sort of your main results and important findings right away? And part of that's because the title and the first few sentences of your abstract are what is the most read part of any paper. So having that up in front will help a reader know that your paper is what they want. And ultimately, we want to shoot for short abstracts, 7 to 10 sentences about that, but always follow the guidelines of the journal you're submitting to. So every journal will have its own guidelines for abstract length. So you always want to follow those guidelines. But the structure should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we want to have a beginning that gives you an idea of what your research question is about, and a statement of that key conclusion right away. So that gives the essential concepts right in the beginning. The middle sort of allows you to talk about how you did your research, other context that is important, and other aspects of the methodology that may be relevant. And then at the end, it's great to wrap up how your findings are valuable, sort of connect your new findings and insights and how that leads you to your conclusion, and how your work essentially adds to or contradicts previous work. So that's a good way to wrap up an abstract. At least that's one way to think about how to create an abstract. Keywords, which are the other important component about, or another component of your paper that is often overlooked. So one approach to choosing keywords so that they really work for you, for that people can find your paper, is to first start by choosing 15 to 20 words or phrases. You obviously won't put 15 or 20 words in a keyword field, but that helps you sort of figure out, okay, what's my short list of keywords that I want to choose from. And then one option is you can always test sort of the keywords searchability. So one thing that I never realized when I was a little earlier in my career is that keywords can also be short phrases. And that's really important when it comes to how people search for and think about searching for papers. So short phrases are just as impactful as a single noun or something like that. And you can look to see how useful some of these keywords are, particularly if you want a more broad audience. So Google Trends, which I'll show you on the next slide, is one way to sort of play around with potential keywords or phrases. Another way that people don't use keywords as effectively as they should, and myself is included in that, including some keywords in your title, early on in your title. Having 3 or 4 of your keywords also occur in your abstract in a way that makes sense contextually. And then also using them in subheadings or headings for the main part of your papers. That all helps search engines tag your paper when someone searches for those keywords. And then in your keyword field, which is something where you'll actually just write out your list of keywords for your paper, you can include the same keywords that you had in your title, your abstract, subheadings, and then any other synonyms that you think would be relevant in that keyword field. So here's an example of Google Trends. So this is just one tool, and I think it's really useful, especially if you're going to write something that may be more geared towards a broad audience. So all I've done here at the top of the slide is I took 3 different climate change related terms. So climate change is the blue line, global warming is the red line, and ocean acidification is the yellow line. And I just searched for essentially the interest over time of these terms using Google Trends. And I just type in Google Trends. And I can look at the last 12 months, or the last 5 years, however you want to do it. And what's interesting is there's some social events that pop up with some of these peaks. So we can see when federal climate change assessment was released, there's an uptick in people's interest in climate change. I find it interesting that during a polar vortex last year, global warming became a popular search term, and then the recent climate strikes as well. But since a lot of you are the part of the LoRX cohort, you may also want to think about search terms in other places. So this graph is showing you the interest in these same terms worldwide. So the previous example was just in the United States. And so you can look at worldwide trends or regional trends or trends in specific countries, particularly if you're going to write something geared towards an audience in a certain area. So again, the same events we can see in these interest peaks, but the climate strike showed another global interest peak that really wasn't obvious in the US data. So Google Trends is kind of fun to play around with as a way to think of a keyword that maybe will be useful to include that maybe you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So this is an example that Wiley has put together of what is a well-optimized abstract and title, really. So the title in this case has the keywords in the beginning and in the end. The keywords themselves are phrases, so seawater chemistry, carbonate saturation state, climate change. And then in the abstract, they've woven together some of those keywords throughout, so that the keywords are embedded in all of these places. So that's the way to really improve the use of the keywords and have them work for you in terms of search engine optimization. And it really just makes your work a bit more visible. And so that's definitely something that I, for sure, have failed at in my experience. So, but as you write these things now, I think it's important to think about, okay, what's a good list of keywords related to my topic, and how can I incorporate them in these important features of my paper that sometimes are kept to the last minute, right? And so you can really allow these features of your paper to help to work for you a little bit more. Okay. Excuse me. So summaries are kind of relatively new. So not every journal requires a summary, and there's several forms of them. So we have video abstracts, graphical abstracts, and written summaries. So examples of what those are called are sometimes 5-point summaries, lay summaries, significant statements. The goal is to have these summaries in addition to those other pieces of your paper. And they, depending on the journal, the audience can be your peers, but they can also be non-academics or more general scientific audience. So much more broadly relatable to researchers who do something a little different than you, right? So another thing that's really helpful or really useful about these kinds of summaries is that they are really easily translatable to social media. So if you write a blog, it's really easy to include a lay summary in your blog. It's supposed to be a more accessible piece of writing anyway, and much shorter. Other types of social media, this is a really useful tool that you can use. If you have a lay summary, you can easily apply it to part of your Twitter feed or something like that. If you have a graphical abstract, that's also something that's really useful in a social media context. If you work at an institution where they do press releases for papers, that's another part of your paper that's already written that lends itself well to something like a press release. So some general tips. So you still want to provide context so readers will know what the relevance is of your research, but you really want to lose the jargon. So complex terms that are hyper-specific or acronyms, things like that, can very quickly lose your audience. And then you also want to be able to add the so what part. So why is it that this research matters? And that can be really challenging to do in such a short space. Another option, though, for doing this are video abstracts. So LNO and LNO methods allow you to present video abstracts, and it's posted on their YouTube page. And so this is for papers that have been accepted. And you can do this in a lot of different ways. So the example on the left here is an animated abstract. The example on the right is just the author on a sailboat talking about the paper, which is just as interesting, and it can be casual but still professional, and still a way to get readers or people engaged with your work. So that's an option for you. It does not have to be onerous or expensive or too difficult to do. That's not the idea. So really, they're only a couple minutes in length. You can use your smartphone to do it. You don't need professional materials. But a good strategy is using a story formula. So telling a little story as part of this process can be as relaxed as you would like, as long as it's still somewhat professional. You can include the figures from your paper, or you can use also animations if you would like. So there are services out there, particularly the Wiley's Research Square, that they hire artists and people to help create visual, graphical, and video abstracts for you, but that does cost money. So I don't think that you need to have a lot of funding to do this sort of thing. I think it's all about your creativity and etching out a little bit of time. And then you've got one other way to try to reach an audience. Graphical abstracts are not just a copy of your best figure from your paper. So a lot of authors tend to do this sometimes. They think, oh, figure one says it all. And sometimes figure one does say it all, but it's not really an abstract. So it doesn't give much of a story format. It doesn't really give much context for why the data is important. So graphical abstracts are also best done when you add those elements. So the context, an important result, and an important implication of those results. So it can be as simple as something like a paper, or sorry, excuse me, something like a figure from your paper with important conclusions drawn around that, or drawn from that data, or it can be more like a comic strip or something like that, which you see here. So at the very last slide of this webinar, there's a list of resources, and Animature Science has a lot of information about how to go about doing this and some good guidance and things like that. So if this is something that's interesting to you and you want to flex your creative muscle, then this is one nice approach also. Some things to think about as you create graphical abstracts, though. Clear, concise, very few words, less than 80 words, and consider your size. So if you want to make a graphical abstract because you want to promote your paper on social media, we have different pixel sizes for your different social media outlets, so that's something to consider. And considering layouts, so multi-panel forms seem to work very well because it allows you to have your sort of storyboard set up. You also want to consider negative space, so space without any images at all, because that is just as impactful, and it prevents you from overwhelming your audience's sensory capabilities. And simple background, simple fonts, so sans serif fonts. So serifs, if you don't know, are the little tiny notches that are on certain fonts like Times New Roman, and they actually take more time to read. So if you want a graphical or visual piece that conveys information quickly, sans serif fonts tend to be able to do that because it takes less time for a reader to read the words. So written summaries are perhaps what you may have encountered you may start to encounter written summaries more often as they're becoming more and more common requirements for certain journals. So these are shorter than your abstracts, 75 to 200 words, single paragraphs, sometimes a bulleted list, and they are designed to be really for either non-scientists or a more broad general scientific audience. So they have to be distinct from your abstract. For instance, L&O letters requires what's called a scientific significance statement that's under 125 words. So 3 sentences with why what you did is important, what you found, and those types of things. And it's designed for, the idea is for it to be accessible for any scientist in the aquatic sciences. So if you're a chemist, it's got to be written in a way for physical oceanographers or biologists to also understand. So that's just an example of one. So part of what happened in terms of the RCF Fellowship and what sort of led us to designing this kind of workshop was us looking at, there's lots of calls out there to use summaries, to use these sort of other approaches to not simplify but clarify your science. And so a lot of journals started requiring them, and scientists and authors started writing them. So Laura Falkenberg really wanted to know, are they actually easier to read and understand? So one thing she found was that in general, abstracts and summaries are similarly unreadable, even though summaries are supposed to be more easily read and more accessible to other researchers. So this data is real data from several different, mainly ecological-based journals, and then their readability score. The abstracts are in blue, the summaries are in orange, and the green dotted line is the readability score of what a newspaper should be. So anything below that is a low readability score, which means that you would have to have a higher education level to comprehend it. And so what Laura found is that abstracts and summaries don't tend to differ in terms of readability, even though that is the goal. And so it's not terribly surprising that if journals just start asking for these things without providing as much guidance as maybe they should, that authors aren't succeeding in hitting this goal of more readable summaries. We also looked at jargon. So that's the percent of words that are deemed rare. And so similarly, this is the same journals and their abstracts versus the lay summaries. And we found that summaries tend to contain less jargon. So those orange bars are lower than their blue counterparts, but still a lot of jargon. So a good percentage of rare words is 5%. So that's the green line there. And that would be something that would be considered readable to the general population as an indicator. So there's still a lot of work to be done. So when you go through and work on writing something like a lay summary and you want it to be effective and you want it to achieve the goal of what the lay summary is for, which is making your work accessible to a broader audience, you want to focus on improving readability. One way to do that is use the Flesch Reading Ease score, which is in Word. You can turn on that scoring in the preferences under the spelling and grammar tools. There's also online calculators, so you can paste in your work and it can give you a readability score back. And then the next step is reducing jargon. So that's reducing the number of rare words. Readability is about the length of the sentences and the number of multi-syllabic words. So if you have a lot of large words with many syllables in a large sentence, your readability goes down. So this is one tool that we've used to look at jargon, or the percentage of rare words. It's called the dejargonizer. The website's on top, and you can cut and paste your text in, and it will give you the percentage of rare or common words, and gives you a sense for how much jargon is there. And then this is an example of an online readability test that you can also just copy and paste your word or your text into, and it will give you readability for many different indexes that calculate readability in different ways. So it's just a way for you to compare two pieces of text and say, is my lay summary that I've been working on actually any easier to read than my abstract? And so I did this with the only lay summary that I've had to write so far, and an abstract for that paper. And just to give you a sense for how challenging it is, my abstracts had a readability score of 0, and the lay summary also 0. So that means it's incomprehensible to people outside of my field. So that's kind of a bummer. And then the lay summary that I wrote has less jargon, but still way too much. So it's not something that is easy, especially if you have never had to do it before. And I didn't get to do a webinar like this, or didn't participate in any sort of professional development that worked on these things. So I wasn't even aware of things like the readability scores or what makes something jargony. So I just wanted to show this so that people don't think that automatically you do these things perfectly, right? It takes a lot of practice. The tiny URL at the bottom of the screen will take you to the summary and abstract that I ran through these tools. So if you're curious to see what I've written that has such atrocious scores, you're more than welcome to look at that. So finally, recommendations for all of these things are ultimately to practice. So working on writing these different types of summaries, and using tools like the reading index or reading scoring tools in Word, something like the dejargonizer tool to look at the percentage of rare words you're using, are good ways to assess whether or not what you think you're writing is very accessible. Workshops, courses, also a lot of blogs and science communication folks talk a lot about this, and so there's a lot of information out there. And I think it's important to try working on different kinds of summaries, different pieces of your paper that you may not have had to create before, like a graphical abstract, and consult with other folks who've done it before and get that feedback and work to improve it. I think it's a bad idea to wait on writing a lay summary until the very end. And so I think you want to think early on about writing more accessible parts of your paper early on. And I think you want to think about what good keywords are early on, so that you can clearly work to embed them throughout your paper in a natural way to help improve visibility of your paper through your keywords as well. So this is a list of references and resources for you. The dejargonizer is up there. Animate Your Science blog has a lot of good pointers about things. Some papers that have studied this to give us some actual data and understanding about writing styles and what is easier to understand. And then the Wiley Author Services has a lot of information as well, and tools and tricks to work on these elements of your paper as well. So I got through it. So at this point, I'm more than happy to answer questions and hear what you all have to say.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey, so much. That was, wow, that was a lot of information.
Sorry.
No, it's great. And one question for me, maybe some other people are typing. Can we get copies of your slides to send to people that registered? Okay, excellent. Okay. let's see. Has anybody submitted any questions? We had a few that were submitted during the registration process, and I think we sent you those. Did you want to touch on any of those?
For sure.
If you've caught your breath.
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay, so I did get some questions from Adrian and Maham beforehand. So one question that I thought was interesting was, how broad or specific should your final sentence be in an abstract? And I thought, ooh, that was a good question. So I think it's important in your final sentence to bring your results back to a broader picture. I don't know if this answers the question, but stating how your new findings lead to new conclusions, and then how does that contradict or add to existing knowledge. So I think that's a good way to sort of end an abstract. So whether or not that is broad or specific, it's almost both in some ways. So you're kind of tying back something very specific from your work to a broad, a broader, bigger idea, right, that you want your readers to come away with. But remember, the most read sentences of the abstract tend to be the first two. So those need to pack a punch too. So
Great.
That answers that question. Let's see. Oh, okay. So I've got some questions that are an example of an effective video abstract you have seen. Ooh. I do enjoy, when I'm on the spot like that, I can't think of one in particular. I do like animated ones, but the problem with that is unless you feel really skilled in doing an animated one, you know, that could be a little intimidating. But I don't think animations are totally necessary. I think some of it, what makes them effective for me, is when you can see the author and the researcher talk about what makes their work exciting. I think that sort of naturally makes it a bit more effective because it's not just dry words on a page. So I think that makes them really good and useful from that standpoint. What would make a video abstract difficult is if it's hard to hear or hard to understand because of some technical difficulties. I think that would be a bigger issue. So I don't know. That was Katrina's question. So I don't know if that answered your question, Katrina, but hopefully you feel a little bit better. Any tools for drawing graphical abstract or animating video abstract? And then Rachel replied, Inkscape is free and pretty good for creating graphics. I have to admit that I am not the best one to do that, or to answer that question, but I'm going to actually connect with Laura, who has done a lot of graphic, not a lot, but has done some more graphical abstracts than me, and I'm going to try to get a good answer for that question, and then I will email Adrian the answer to that, so you have that. Okay, so Elia, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. Always told keywords to not be in your title because you only get up to 6 keywords. Since you only get 6 keywords, told to use the keywords in the title and then use the keyword section to add more to raise the number of searchable keywords for things like Scholar and Web of Science. Okay, so the keyword, okay, so I think this is how to answer this very valid point, because you only have a limited number of keywords. Absolutely. So it's about balancing searchable terms that people are likely to type in to a search engine and including some of those valuable searchable terms in your title, in the abstracts, and in the subheadings. Your keyword section should definitely be used to add more to that, for sure. So you should probably, and this is through suggestions and talking with folks at Wiley who collect a lot of data on how things are accessed and how people view papers and decide what to read. So you should create a larger list of keywords than what you will actually put in your keyword field. So you can definitely use the same repeatable, what you think are keywords in your title, and then throughout your abstract, and then throughout your paper, and then add to the ones that you have in your paper. You still want them in your keyword list, because that helps the indexing services. So things that index your abstracts and collector abstracts and databases still also use the keywords, but not necessarily as much of the titles. So you want to balance having a couple keywords that are in the abstract, possibly in the title, and also in the keyword subfield, and then synonyms for those in the keyword subfield. Maybe I didn't answer that very well, but that is my understanding of the way to optimize and maximize the keywords that you use, hopefully. Okay, that's a great question. That's a really great question. And one thing I want to note also is writing, in particular writing styles and approaches, are very, in a lot of ways, they're very subjective. So what your current PI would expect and what they anticipate to be the way to do something might be very different from another PI, and neither is wrong. But you will also find your sort of own philosophy towards it as well. So.
Kelsey, if you don't mind, I just want to point out to people, you've mentioned the Wiley resources a few times.
Yeah.
I'm going to grab the screen and show you where you can find that on ASLO's,
Please do.
On our publications website. Sorry, I'm used to calling it by an acronym that no one else will understand. So this is the ASLO homepages, and we had them pull everything that they have onto this author resources. Hopefully people can see my screen tab. And there's a whole section on writing for SEO. There's all kinds of information about sharing your research, and there are also these training webinars, and I know that they've had a few specifically about SEO, and they've talked about this issue of keywords and abstracts and they're in some real depth. So if you're hungry for more information, you can easily access that through the ASLO journals right there. Okay. You're welcome to take the screen back, although I see we're coming in on the close.
Yeah.
Do we have any last burning questions from anyone?
Let me see if I can get to my chat.
Okay. I'm not seeing anything.
Let me see one.
Another thing, just while you're sorting through to see if you had any more you wanted to address, Kelsey, you've mentioned Laura Falkenberg a few times, the other Raelyn Cole Fellow, and just to let the LAURAC students know, Laura will be a meeting mentor in, I almost said San Juan, in San Diego at the Ocean Sciences meeting. She's done a significant amount of international research, and so she'll be giving a presentation to you all at the orientation, and so you'll have an opportunity to talk to her. They're both about her international experience as well as all of this editorial writing stuff she's been doing through the Cole Fellowship. Anyway, any last pearls of wisdom? Kelsey, thank you so much.
No, I hope that the other questions I got, which were about keywords, finding good important ones, also some questions about how PIs or one question about how PI become good writers. I hope that some of that has come through in the actual presentation itself. But a lot of it's practice. I'm a firm believer that it's just doing it. So,
Yes.
and not being scared to do it and getting feedback. So,
Yeah.
which is easier said than done. But
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll be compressing this file and getting it posted online. And as soon as I get the presentation files, I'll send it out to everyone as well.
And I'm more than happy to answer other questions about this or the fellowship or other similar topics if anyone wants to reach out. That's fine with me too. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks.
Bye.